The work of the January 6th committee is essential, not just to hold the people accountable who planned an all-out assault on our democracy, but to ensure that it never happens again. In his new book, They Want to Kill Americans, Malcolm Nance details the threat America faces from the far right. Quote, over time, as they continue to reject the 2020 election, they will merge into an active American insurgency. The armed contingents could well join into an alliance of physical resistance forces to threaten and agitate for the largest armed rebellion since the Civil War. Then they will attempt to return to power. The urge to return to a place of normalcy, to forget about Trump and his followers, though emotionally understandable, is the worst possible response that we can have to potential future dangers. And joining me now is Malcolm Nance, author of They Want to Kill Americans, the Militias, Terrorists, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency. Malcolm, my friend, welcome back to the United States. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I feel like I'm burying the lead because I know you just came back from Ukraine, but I want to get to this book first because, as usual, you are a little Nostradamus here with the things that you write. Because one of the things that we've seen in these hearings is that groups like the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, and the Oath Keepers, Kelly Meggs of the Oath Keepers actually sent out like an email or a Facebook post saying, hey, we're coming together. That's what you're predicting in your book. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's not so much a prediction anymore. I mean, as you recall, on November 6, 2020, I was on Real Time with Bill Maher. And when everyone was on the show preaching Kumbaya, let's get together and try to understand the Trump voters, I said, I have some bad news for you. They are going into insurgency. An insurgency is not an insurrection. An insurrection is just one action that takes place during that insurgency. An insurgency is a broad campaign which may involve political actions and resistance in the halls of power, moving the debate from the halls of power to the streets, political violence, terrorism, and destabilization. That's what an insurgency is. And I label that insurgency what I could clearly call it now, which is TITUS, T-I-T-U-S, which stands for the Trump insurgency in the United States. It's well underway. And one of those statements that you had read a little earlier, the one about normalcy, that was actually written before January 6th. As part of the documentation that we had in the book, that there was this urge to return to normalcy after the November 2020 election. And we saw where that got us. 62 days after I made that prediction of Bill Maher, the United States government had an attempt to overthrow it. But all of those players were talking to each other, were communicating publicly in these forums. And I had what January 6th committee has just recently released. I had written in this book a year ago, but this insurgency has very long legs. We have only seen the start of it.
And what's interesting is you've seen the far right pivot from mainly anti-black sentiment and Nazi-ish sentiment and the kind of things we saw in Charlottesville to a real fixation on trans people in particular, but LGBTQ people in particular. And so, I've stopped calling it like conservative or far right even. It's sort of anti-modernist extremism. It's everything about the modern world that they hate, whether it's, racial progress or progress for, queer folks. How does all of this fit together in one ideological movement? What is it that they ultimately want the country to look like other than a, white ethno state or whatever it is they want?
Well, the hallmark of the TITUS, the Trump insurgency of the United States, is to return America to an alternate variant of what they think America is. And I'm paraphrasing Thomas Ricks, who said that there's an entire class of older and middle class white people like him who would rather see America destroyed than to have it redefined through equality or diversity or sharing, which is absolutely ludicrous.
We could talk to you about this all day, but I do have to ask you about your experience in Ukraine. You went there to support the fighting forces in the most direct way, my friend. What did you learn about the capabilities of the Ukrainians and the possibility that they can ultimately defeat Putin's illegal war and occupation?
Well, interestingly enough, I will be going back in about 10 days. to fill my duty working as part of the Legion Battalion. But what I learned on the ground is exactly what I had predicted on air on this very channel. That I know it does what we call Z+3. That's 72 hours after the beginning of the invasion. I was on with Chris Jansing, and she said, "Well, what do you think is going to happen to the city of Kyiv?" I said, "Nothing's going to happen to the city of Kyiv. They will never take that city. They don't even have the resources to take that part of the country." The Ukrainian army had let major forces run out extremely long fuel supplies and logistics trains, and they slaughtered them. And then when the tanks were running out of fuel, they have what we call a Javelin Festival, where they bring out every Javelin missile and destroy every tank. What I learned is what I learned before the war, is that these people, if invaded, and they were invaded, were just going to go full Cossack on the Russians. The Russians are afraid of the Ukrainian soldier. That's one thing that I've learned. Some of those units don't have as much discipline as the main force army, but the main force army is a NATO-level lethal force, which is why Russia has shifted to these tactics away from maneuver, in which they get wiped out completely, to marching artillery through and destroying utterly every town, village, field, and then incrementally bringing up tanks.
Yeah.
And they're trying to trick the Ukrainian forces. They are not going to win. The Ukrainians are going to win. I'm going back to help them win, and I'll see you all on Victory Over Russia Day.
All right. Well, I be safe, stay safe. Make sure that you stay in touch. Malcolm Nance, one of my faves. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here.